Chapter 1. Before the Storm. The old Parker farmhouse sat at the bend of a quiet river in Willow Creek, a town people usually forgot when they looked at maps, but for 12-year-old Ethan Parker, it was the whole world, a creaking, two-story heart that had held 3 generations of his family's laughter, secrets, and goodbyes. From his bedroom window, Ethan could see the river snaking through the cottonwoods, silver in the morning, bronze at dusk. In the summer, he and Bear would splash in its shallows, throwing sticks that Bear would chase, water spraying off his thick coat when he bounded back to shore. But on this late March afternoon, the river looked sluggish and swollen, hugging its banks as if deciding whether to slip free. Inside, the air smelled of rain and old books. A lone baseball sat perched on the shelf above Ethan's bed, next to a faded photo in a wood frame, his dad, in uniform, sunburned and grinning wide as he knelt beside Bear, who then was just a floppy-eared pup with more paws than sense. "You take care of him, and he'll take care of you." Ethan never forgot those words. Sometimes, when the house was too quiet at night, he whispered them into Bear's fur, as if they were a spell that might pull his father back from wherever the desert had taken him. Downstairs, Claire Parker moved through the kitchen like a ghost of herself. Her husband's old flannel shirt was draped over her shoulders, sleeves rolled up as she scrubbed dishes that didn't really need washing. The TV murmured in the living room, a weatherman's voice low and polite, talking about the rain in terms of inches and inches in terms of problems for other people. Claire didn't pay it much mind. They'd lived by the river forever. It had risen before. It would recede again. Outside, Bear lay sprawled on the back porch, ears flicking at the drizzle tapping the wooden boards. His fur was darker now, more black than tan, and when he lifted his head to look through the screen door, his eyes found Ethan's, then flicked to the river, then back again. Ethan knew that look. It was the same one Bear gave him when he was little and tried to wander too close to the water's edge alone. A look that said, "Not yet, not now, not without me." Ethan finished his homework at the kitchen table. He read each problem twice because the rain tapping the windows made him think of nights when his father's voice filled the house, telling stories about places so far away Ethan thought they might be made up. He'd tell Ethan that the desert smelled like sun-baked iron, that the nights were so cold you could see your breath, that sometimes you had to believe the darkness could be friendly if you knew where to look. When Ethan asked if monsters were real, his father would point to Bear, who would lift his sleepy head from the rug and blink at them, and say, "If there are monsters, this boy will eat them before they get to you." Ethan's pencil scratched out answers he didn't really believe. Outside, the drizzle thickened to steady rain, a sound that filled every corner of the old farmhouse. After dinner, leftover stew Claire barely tasted, Ethan grabbed Bear's worn leash and clipped it to his collar. He didn't need to. Bear never ran off, not once, but it felt right, a ritual, a memory of how his dad would stand by the door, whistling softly for Bear to sit before clipping the leash to his collar with a soft click, like saying, "I've got you, we're good." They stepped out into the darkening yard. The grass was already soft underfoot, soaking through Ethan's sneakers. The river hissed softly beyond the trees, swollen and restless under the moon. Bear sniffed the air, nose twitching. He stopped halfway down the yard, ears forward, body rigid. Ethan followed his gaze. Beyond the old fence, the water pressed against the trunks of the cottonwoods, licking higher than he'd ever seen it this time of year. "Come on, boy," Ethan whispered. He tugged the leash gently, but Bear didn't move at first. His hackles rose just a fraction, a ripple of unease that made Ethan's stomach tighten. "It's fine," Ethan told him, but his own voice sounded thin in the hush of the rising wind. "It's just rain." Bear let himself be led away, but he kept looking back over his shoulder, tail stiff and low. Inside, Claire tucked Ethan in. She tried to smile as she brushed damp hair from his forehead. "Don't worry about the river, baby. It'll do what it does every spring. Remember when you were little, and it flooded the back pasture? We just played pirates until it dried up." Ethan nodded but didn't answer. He watched Bear circle twice at the foot of his bed before settling in a heavy heap, chin on his paws. He watched the shadows slide across the ceiling, rain whispering against the glass. Claire lingered in the doorway. She turned off the light and stood there for a moment, listening to her son's slow breathing, to the sigh Bear gave as he drifted half asleep. She wished, not for the first time, that David would step through that door, boots muddy, uniform damp, grin wide, and say he was sorry he was late. But the rain kept falling, and there was only the quiet thump of Bear's tail as if to say, "I'm here, I'll keep watch." Chapter 2. The storm approaches. When Ethan woke the next morning, Bear was already up. He sat by the window, nose pressed to the glass, breath fogging up a small circle on the cold pane. Outside, the world was a muted watercolor of grays and silvers. The rain had not stopped, if anything. It had found a new resolve overnight. It fell straight and hard, flattening the yard into puddles that connected in shallow rivers. Then Ethan heard it. Not just rain hammering the roof, but a low, steady roar beneath it, like a freight train rumbling through the belly of the earth. Bear stood, muscles tense, hackles raised. "Bear?" Ethan whispered, but the dog had already moved to the window. He reared up, paws against the glass, eyes locked on something Ethan couldn't see. When the next gust of wind rattled the whole wall, Bear dropped down and nudged Ethan's shoulder hard, up. "Now." Claire's voice rose over the roar, muffled through the hallway. She was on the phone again, but this time her voice cracked in a way that made Ethan's stomach lurch. "Please. We can't get out. The water's at the back door." "No, it's inside now." "What do you mean you can't?" Ethan scrambled out of bed. The floorboards were cold under his bare feet, the air thick and sour. He didn't bother with slippers. He didn't think about socks. He grabbed Bear's collar and they bolted together down the hallway toward his mother's voice. Claire was standing by the kitchen door, phone pressed to her ear, her other hand braced against the wall like it was the only thing holding her up. Through the glass, Ethan saw it. The yard was gone. The water had swallowed it whole, pressed up against the porch steps and now poured through the cracks like greedy fingers. "Mom." She turned at his voice, her face pale and wet with rain or tears or both. She dropped the phone. It bounced once on the linoleum and slid under the table. "Upstairs," she said. Her voice was hoarse, raw from arguing with no one who could help. "Ethan, baby, go. Go now." Ethan rolled over and checked the clock. 6:07 a.m. Normally, he'd groan and bury his face under the blanket for 5 more minutes. But Bear's tense posture pushed sleep away. The dog's ears twitched with every gust of wind rattling the siding. "Hey, Bear." Ethan sat up, scratching the shepherd's flank. Bear flicked an ear but didn't look away from the window. His muscles were tight under Ethan's fingertips, a coiled wire humming with a warning only Bear seemed able to hear. Downstairs, the smell of burnt toast drifted up the hallway. Claire was awake early, too. She rarely slept through the night anymore. Not since David. Not since the desert took more than just her husband, it took her sleep. Her easy laugh. The part of her that used to trust that the sun would always rise and nothing bad would come with it. Ethan dressed quickly. His socks soaked through the second he stepped off the porch. He squelched across the yard to the fence, Bear trotting behind him without the leash this time. Together they stood at the edge of the back pasture. The river, their river, was no longer content to sit quiet and polite behind its banks. It lapped at the fence posts now, lazy fingers of water tugging at the bottom rails. "Mom's gonna freak," Ethan murmured. He tried to smile, but Bear didn't share the joke. He planted himself between Ethan and the fence line, tail rigid. When they came back inside, Claire was on the phone again, pacing the length of the kitchen like an anxious caged bird. "No, Janice, I don't know if we'll come in. The road's washed out past Miller's place already." "Yes, I know. But I'm not packing up this house just because the news says to panic. We've been here before." Ethan sat at the table, Bear curled at his feet, his heavy tail thumping once against Ethan's shoes. He could feel the tension in his mother's voice. When she hung up, she pressed her hands to her temples, eyes squeezed shut. "Mom, is it really bad?" Ethan asked. Claire forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, it's just rain. You know this river. It's all bark, no bite." Ethan wanted to believe her. He wanted it more than anything. But Bear shifted beside him, leaning his warm weight against Ethan's shin like an anchor in a current that was already starting to pull. School was canceled by mid-morning. The phone call rang out through the house, due to flooding concerns. Claire hung up and let the phone drop onto the counter. She turned to Ethan with a sigh. "Well, looks like you've got the day off." "Cool," Ethan said automatically, but there was nothing cool about the way the wind scraped against the windowpanes. Nothing cool about the hush that fell over Willow Creek when the rain refused to pause. They spent the afternoon packing things upstairs, not because they really believed they'd need to, but because it felt like doing something. Claire climbed the attic ladder with boxes of old photographs. Ethan behind her, Bear's head poking through the hatch like a curious sentinel. The attic smelled like cedar and old paper. Ethan found his father's box of medals tucked in the corner, the neat row of ribbons, a folded flag in plastic, and the letter that Claire never opened after the official knock came at midnight 3 years ago. "Mom, can we?" Ethan began, but Claire cut him off with a soft shake of her head. "Not now, baby. Let's just get these somewhere safe." Ethan watched her slip the letter back into the box like it was made of glass. Bear lay down at Ethan's side, resting his chin on the boy's knee. They sat there together as the rain drummed a steady heartbeat on the roof above. By dusk, the power flickered twice, then held steady. Claire lit candles in the living room just in case, their warm glow a fragile defense against the deepening gloom outside. They ate canned soup and crackers by candlelight. Bear curled like a sentinel under the table. Claire tried to make it normal, asked Ethan about his science project, reminded him to feed Bear half a can of wet food because the dry stuff was almost out. But every time Thunder grumbled, her eyes flicked toward the back door as if expecting to see the river standing there, polite and patient no longer. When Ethan lay down that night, he didn't even pretend to close his eyes. Bear curled tight against his side, so close Ethan could feel the steady rise and fall of his ribs. "You'd tell me, right?" Ethan whispered into the darkness. He pressed his face into Bear's fur, breathing in the warm smell of rain and earth and dog, a smell that made him feel safer than his own heartbeat ever could. Bear shifted closer, a deep, soft whine rising in his throat. He didn't move otherwise, just rested his paw over Ethan's ankle like a soldier standing watch. Outside, the rain fell harder. Chapter 3, The Flood. The wind woke Ethan first, a sharp, guttural howl scraping against the window frame. He opened his eyes to darkness, the shape of his room half swallowed by the flickering glow of a flashlight that sat balanced on his nightstand. Beside him, Bear's ears twitched, then flattened. The big shepherd lifted his head, nose quivering at the stale air that smelled of wet wood and something else Ethan couldn't name, something electric and wrong. A sharp crack split the night, a tree in the yard giving way under the weight of the wind and water. Ethan flinched. Bear barked once, short, furious, then nudged Ethan's leg so hard he stumbled. They ran for the stairs. Claire followed, glancing back at the water pushing its way through the back door. She grabbed the photo of David from the mantel without thinking, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. Halfway up the stairs, Ethan's foot slipped on the wet wood. He landed hard on his knee, gasping at the sudden flare of pain. Claire bent to grab him, but Bear was faster, teeth gently gripping Ethan's sleeve, pulling him upright. The dog's eyes met his, a command stronger than words. "Up, now, move." They made it to the landing just as the water hit the first step. It wasn't a trickle anymore, it was a living thing, a cold, brown surge that smelled of mud and broken things. Furniture floated, bumping against walls. Claire grabbed Ethan's arm and shoved open the attic hatch, pushing him up through the square of darkness. "Go, baby, Bear. Up," she called, voice breaking. Bear bounded up behind Ethan, claws scrabbling at the attic floorboards as he hauled his big body through. Claire followed last, pushing the hatch shut just as the water slapped against it from below. The attic was small, more crawlspace than room. It smelled of old cedar and forgotten summers. The only light came from the small round vent near the peak of the roof, where pale moonlight slipped through the rain. Claire pressed her ear to the hatch, listening to the water churn beneath. "Mom?" Ethan whispered. She didn't answer at first. She just pressed the photo of David to her chest. When she finally looked at Ethan, her eyes were wide but dry. Empty in a way he hadn't seen before. "It's okay," she lied. "We just have to wait. They'll come." Bear paced the narrow floor, nails clicking softly. He sniffed every corner, ears flicking back at every groan of the old beams. He pressed his nose to Ethan's cheek, warm, damp, grounding. Then he curled up beside the boy, pressing his thick fur against Ethan's cold legs. Hours passed, maybe days, Ethan couldn't tell. The roar of the wind and water blurred into the thrum of his own heartbeat. Claire dozed with her back against the wall, the photo of David still clutched in her lap. Ethan leaned into Bear's shoulder, fingers twined in the dog's thick scruff. Every so often Bear would lift his head, ears forward, listening for something Ethan couldn't hear. A sudden crash made them all jump, the sharp splinter of wood breaking somewhere below them. Claire crawled to the hatch and pressed her ear against it again. "It's rising," she whispered. "God, it's still rising." A distant shout broke through the storm. A voice, two voices, and the faint putter of a boat motor weaving through the flooded streets. "Hey, hey, up here." Claire pounded on the attic walls with her fists. "We're here, please, up here." Ethan crawled to the vent and pressed his face against the mesh. Through the rain he saw them. Two men in bright orange vests, a boat nosing through the debris that used to be their neighborhood. Bear barked. One deep, echoing boom that cut through the wind like a flare. Again. He shoved his head against Ethan's shoulder, as if to say, "They're here. Hold on." The boat came closer. One of the men stood, shouting over the wind. Claire threw the hatch open wide, waving her arms through the hole. They could see the water now, only inches below the attic floor. Floating family photos drifted by, the only proof their lives hadn't always been drowning. The rescuers yelled instructions Ethan couldn't hear over the storm. Claire turned to Bear. "Bear, down boy. Let them get Ethan." But Bear wouldn't leave Ethan's side. When the first rescuer pulled himself through the hatch, the attic groaned under the new weight. A beam overhead shifted with a sickening creak. The man barely had time to grab Ethan's arm when the beam gave way. The world cracked in half. Wood splintered. Water roared up through the broken floor. Ethan screamed as something heavy pinned his leg, pain exploding white-hot through his shin. "Ethan!" Claire's voice was raw terror. She grabbed his shoulders, but the beam wouldn't budge. The rescuer tried to wedge his crowbar under it, but the angle was wrong. The wood just sank deeper. Bear lunged at the beam, teeth sinking into the splintered wood. He pulled, snarling, muscles straining so hard his whole body shook. He let go only to shift his grip, claws tearing splinters from the floor as he pushed his massive shoulder under the timber. "Bear, no," Ethan sobbed, "you'll hurt yourself." But Bear didn't stop. He pushed, pulled, shoved with his whole body. The rescuer yelled for help down to his partner below. Claire sobbed Ethan's name again and again. One last surge. Bear's shoulders heaving, his muzzle wet with rain and spit and blood from where the splinters cut him. The beam shifted, just enough. The rescuer yanked Ethan's leg free. He roared in pain but felt the weight lift, the sudden cold bite of water rushing in under him. "Go, go," the rescuer shouted. He shoved Ethan toward the hatch. Claire followed, half dragging her son, half pushing Bear, who now stumbled and swayed on his paws. The rescuer grabbed Bear's collar, hauling his sodden bulk through the opening just as the attic floor vanished beneath a black surge of river water. The boat rocked under their combined weight. Ethan sobbed into Bear's soaked neck, arms wrapped tight around the shepherd's shoulders. Bear's breaths came in wet, shuddering pants. His eyes fluttered half-closed but never left Ethan's face. Claire clutched Ethan's back with one hand, David's photo pressed to her chest with the other, as the rescuer turned the boat toward the last stretch of open water. Above them, dawn struggled through the clouds, pale, bruised, and patient. And Bear, the dog who promised to keep Ethan safe, lay still against the boy's chest, heart beating slow but steady as the river carried them away from everything they'd ever known. Chapter 4, Aftermath Survival. The shelter they ended up in wasn't a real shelter, just the old high school gymnasium on the far side of Willow Creek that hadn't taken on water yet. Cots lined the basketball court in uneven rows, and wet clothes dripped from the bleachers where people hung them like surrender flags. The air smelled of damp clothes, antiseptic, and exhaustion. Ethan lay curled on a thin cot wedged against the far wall. Bear lay beside him on a torn blanket that smelled faintly of bleach and disinfectant. His fur was still damp, even though the volunteers did what they could to towel him off. Every so often, Bear shivered, a tremor that rippled through his big frame like an echo of the river that nearly stole him. Claire sat on the next cot over, her shoulders hunched, a styrofoam cup of watery coffee cooling in her hands. Her eyes were red and raw from crying, but she hadn't shed a tear since they'd carried Ethan and Bear off the rescue boat. Now she just stared at the wall where the paint peeled in long strips, lost in the roar that still lived somewhere behind her eyes. Bear's breathing wasn't right. Ethan could feel it when he pressed his cheek to the shepherd's ribs, too shallow, too wet. Sometimes Bear would lift his head, look at Ethan with those deep, patient eyes, and try to wag his tail, but even that simple gesture left him trembling. A volunteer named Mrs. Green, whose son had played Little League with Ethan 2 summers ago, crouched down beside them with a fresh blanket. She smelled like soap and cigarettes. "Sweetheart, he really needs a vet," she murmured, voice low so Claire wouldn't hear. "There's a pop-up clinic at the Baptist church, but they're only taking a few at a time, mostly strays, lost pets. He's yours, right? He stayed with you?" Ethan nodded, his chin digging into Bear's side. Bear let out a faint grunt, tail flicking once. Ethan ran his hand along the shepherd's flank, feeling every rib, every warm patch of matted fur. "He's mine," Ethan said. "He's always been mine." Mrs. Green squeezed his shoulder. "I'll see what I can do, honey. Just keep talking to him, okay? Sometimes it helps." Ethan didn't need to be told. He'd been whispering to Bear since the boat. Words like "stay," "please," "I'm right here." Words he didn't even know he knew until they spilled out in the dark. When the vet finally came, she was young, not much older than Ethan's cousin, with hair pulled into a tight bun and rubber gloves that smelled like alcohol wipes. She knelt by Bear and ran her hands gently along his ribs, his hips, lifting his heavy head to look in his eyes. "He's strong," she said softly, mostly to Ethan. "Strong dogs sometimes give everything they have to keep their people safe. Sometimes they forget to hold back a little for themselves." Ethan pressed closer, his hand buried in Bear's scruff. "He'll be okay, right?" The vet didn't answer right away. She pulled a stethoscope from her kit, slid it under Bear's damp fur, listened for a long time. Her mouth was tight when she looked at Ethan. "He needs rest, warmth, fluids, and hope. He's fighting hard, but you have to help him fight, okay? Talk to him. Remind him why he needs to come back." Claire let out a shuddering breath. "If you can't save him." The vet cut her off gently. "He's not gone yet, ma'am. Let's not bury him while he's still trying." That night, Ethan lay on the cot with Bear's big head on his chest. He listened to the wet rasp of each breath, counted the slow, dragging beats of Bear's heart. He remembered his father's voice the day they brought Bear home. "He'll take care of you, but you take care of him too. Okay, buddy? That's the deal." Ethan closed his eyes. He could feel the river still, cold and dark, pressing at the corners of his mind. But here, under the thin blankets, he whispered into Bear's ear. "You did your part. You got me out. You don't have to keep fighting alone. I got you now, I promise." Bear's tail thumped once, so faint Ethan wondered if he imagined it. The days blurred, one long drip of rain against the windows, one steady thrum of worried voices and distant helicopters. Each day, Claire left for a few hours, checking in at the town hall to see if any of their things could be salvaged, filling out forms for FEMA, arguing quietly with people about insurance that might never come through. She came back each time with something small, a granola bar, a pack of dry socks, a battered stuffed bear Ethan used to sleep with when he was 5. She'd hand these things to him without a word, then sit by his side and watch Bear breathe. Neighbors drifted past, leaving bits of hope behind. Old Mrs. Connolly, who lost her own home years ago to a fire, pressed a half-melted chocolate bar into Ethan's hand. Mr. Jenkins, who always yelled about Bear chasing squirrels through his garden, brought over an old dog bowl he found bobbing near the post office. "Figured he'd want something familiar when he wakes up," Jenkins muttered, embarrassed by the softness in his voice. Ethan thanked them all, but he didn't really hear their words. He only heard Bear's slow, ragged breaths and the echo of his father's voice. "Take care of him, buddy, that's the deal." On the 4th night, the cold snap came. The storm had passed, but the wind cut sharp through the gym doors whenever someone came in. Ethan wrapped Bear in every blanket he could find, tucking them tight around his broad shoulders, pressing his own body close to share every ounce of warmth he had. Somewhere in that long stretch of darkness, Ethan felt Bear shift. The shepherd's big head lifted just a fraction, enough for him to press his nose against Ethan's wrist, the touch so soft it almost broke the boy in half. I'm here. Bear, Ethan whispered, voice raw. I'm right here. Bear's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but warm, a flicker of gold in the shadows. And then, the smallest thing, a sigh, deep and rumbling, like a tired old man settling down for a nap. Bear's tail thumped once, twice, against the blanket. Ethan pressed his forehead to Bear's. Hot tears slipped down his cheeks, sinking into the shepherd's fur. He didn't bother wiping them away. It's okay, he whispered, rocking them both like a mother rocks her baby. It's okay, I got you now. When dawn finally came, the world outside the gym was still broken, streets lined with ruined furniture, yards buried in brown silt, cars turned to rusting islands in a sea of debris. But inside, Ethan sat awake beside his dog, his hand buried in warm fur that smelled faintly of river mud and something better, something like hope. Bear breathed, and that was enough. Chapter 5, Rebuilding. The day they let them go back to what was left of their street, the sun was out for the first time in weeks. It was a thin, watery light that slipped through the clouds as if testing the ground it once knew. The rescue crews had come and gone. The helicopters drifted elsewhere. The news vans found other tragedies to film. All that remained was the steady, stubborn work of what came after, hauling out the ruin, lifting the pieces that could be lifted, burying the rest. Ethan held Bear's leash loosely in his hand as they stepped from the borrowed truck. Claire had fought to bring Bear home that day. The vet said he wasn't quite strong enough, that his leg was still too swollen, that the damp might undo what little healing his lungs had managed. But Claire knew, the same way Ethan knew, that Bear wouldn't mend in a shelter gym under harsh fluorescent lights. He needed dirt under his paws, old scents in the yard, the ghosts of a life he'd almost given up to save. Their house was still standing, though it looked more like a skeleton now than a home. The porch sagged under the weight of drying mud. The windows were gone, or cracked, or smeared with the river's dirty fingerprints. Claire stood at the foot of the steps, her hand resting on the porch rail, David's photo pressed tight to her side. For a moment, none of them moved. Even Bear stood still, his muzzle lifted, nostrils flaring at the scent of damp wood and river silt. His tail twitched once, then he stepped forward, slow and stiff-legged, testing the ache in his shoulder where the beam had pinned him days ago. Go on, boy, Ethan murmured, voice raw with awe and something else, something that tasted like relief and heartbreak all at once. Go on, Bear, it's still home. Inside, the floorboards squelched under their boots. Claire tugged her sleeves over her hands and began the slow, impossible work of sifting through the remains. The kitchen drawers warped shut, the photos curling on waterlogged walls. The framed school picture of Ethan in third grade stuck to the mud like a fragile leaf. She peeled it free and set it aside. Bear nosed through the wreckage beside Ethan. He sniffed at a half-buried baseball glove, a dented lunchbox, the scraps of a soggy blanket that used to live on Ethan's bed. Every so often he'd pause, head cocked, tail giving a weak thump as if to say, here, this mattered once. Together, they piled small treasures by the door. A faded toy truck, a picture of David in uniform, the wooden name plaque that once hung on Ethan's bedroom door. By afternoon, the sun broke fully through the clouds. Steam rose off the muddy yard as if the earth itself was trying to shrug off the river's weight. Volunteers trickled through, neighbors, strangers, a church group from the next county over. They brought plastic bins and sandwiches wrapped in foil. Someone set up a folding table and laid out bottles of water like offerings. Bear dozed on the porch, his bandaged leg stretched awkwardly beside him. Every so often he'd lift his head, tracking Ethan's movements as the boy carried another box to the pile. Claire watched them both from the kitchen doorway, her arms wrapped around David's photo like a lifeline. Mrs. Green appeared again, this time with a stack of clean blankets and a fresh bag of dog kibble balanced on her hip. I thought he'd like something soft to lie on, she said, nodding toward Bear. Hard ground's no good for tired bones. Ethan helped her spread a blanket on the patch of dry wood by the front door. Bear sniffed it, circled twice, and lowered himself down with a soft grunt. His eyes fluttered shut as Ethan tucked the edges around his belly. They stayed like that for days, clearing, sorting, finding what could be found. Each night, they slept on borrowed cots in the back of the rescue truck or on a neighbor's floor. And every night, Bear curled close to Ethan, his slow, warm breath in time with the boy's heartbeat. On the 10th day, Claire found the letter. It had floated free of David's box, washed into a corner of the old pantry that somehow hadn't collapsed. The envelope was ruined, the ink smudged to blue ghosts, but the paper inside was dry enough to read. She sat on the porch steps, the letter trembling in her hands. Ethan sat beside her, Bear's head heavy in his lap. "Should I go inside?" Ethan asked softly. Claire shook her head. "No, you stay." She unfolded the letter. Her eyes flicked to the neat, careful handwriting. David's voice pressed into paper before the desert took him away. "Claire, Ethan." The words blurred, but she read on. It was simple, no grand speech, just a promise she already knew by heart, that he loved them, that he trusted them to keep going, that Bear would watch Ethan like a brother, and Ethan would watch Bear like a promise that never died. When she finished, she pressed the letter to her chest. Let the tears come this time. Didn't hide them. Ethan leaned into her side. Bear's tail tapped the porch boards, soft and sure. Spring turned to summer in Willow Creek. Slowly, painfully, the town pieced itself back together. The Parkers didn't rebuild the old house. The foundation was too cracked, the mold too deep in the walls to chase out, but a local church group raised money for a small, clean trailer on higher ground at the edge of town. It wasn't much, 2 tiny bedrooms, thin carpet that smelled like new paint, but it was warm, dry, and safe. Bear found his spot by the front door the first night. He turned 3 slow circles on his blanket, settled down with a sigh that rumbled through the floor. His bad leg still stiffened in the rain, but Ethan didn't mind. Every morning, he walked Bear down the new gravel drive, the leash slack between them. They'd stand by the fence line and watch the river in the distance, its slow glittering curve under the sun. Sometimes, Ethan would crouch down, press his forehead to Bear's and whisper things he'd never tell anyone else, secrets, dreams, the pieces of grief too heavy for his mother to hold. Bear listened, as he always did. When Ethan pulled back, the shepherd's tail would flick once, his eyes patient and kind. One warm June evening, Ethan sat on the back step with his knees drawn to his chest. Bear sprawled beside him, head resting on Ethan's sneaker. Claire leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching her boy and his dog with something like quiet awe. "You ready to come inside?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Not yet." He scratched behind Bear's ear, felt the soft rumble of a contented sigh. "Dad was right," Ethan murmured. "He said Bear would protect me." Claire smiled, a small, tired thing that still glowed in the twilight. "He did, sweetheart, and you protected him right back." Ethan rested his cheek on Bear's warm fur. The river glittered out there beyond the fence, harmless for now, a memory of something bigger than fear. "I'll always protect him, Mom, I promise." Bear huffed, as if he understood. His tail thumped twice, steady as the heartbeat that once pulled Ethan back from the dark. And so they stayed there, boy and dog, battered but whole, while the sun dipped below the trees, and the world turned quiet again. And this time, the river kept its distance, and the promise held.
If this tale moved you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the triumph, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more thrilling, emotional, and inspiring stories your way. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Do you believe dogs have an extraordinary sixth sense? Share your thoughts and personal stories with us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.